Have you ever had someone invade your personal space so arrogantly that you felt you had no choice but to teach them a lesson they would never forget? That's exactly what happened to me when the notorious Karen sisters decided my private garage was their own personal parking lot. I didn't even know them well, but I knew of their reputation: loud, entitled, always demanding special treatment from neighbors. One morning I stepped outside ready to leave for work, only to find my garage occupied by their shiny SUV. At first I thought it must be a mistake, but no, it wasn't. When I asked them about it, they smirked and said, "We'll only be a couple of hours. You'll be fine." Fine. They had locked me out of my own space, standing there as if they owned the whole neighborhood. Their arrogance lit a fire in me that I couldn't ignore. If they thought they could trespass and get away with it, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. I didn't argue, I didn't shout. I simply walked back into my house with a calm smile, leaving them to think they had one. But inside, I was already crafting a plan, one that would not only teach them respect but also remind them that actions have consequences. I had a long trip coming up in 2 days, and suddenly, the timing couldn't have been more perfect. So, I made my move. I shut the garage door, locked it from the outside, packed my bags, and left for 10 days. Their car, their problem, their arrogance, their downfall. What happened when I returned was beyond anything I expected. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when everything started. The sun had just climbed over the rooftops, casting long shadows across my street. Birds were chirping, kids were already heading off to school, and for a moment, life seemed calm. I had woken up early, brewed myself a strong cup of coffee, and was looking forward to getting a head start on the day. Little did I know, that morning would mark the beginning of a storm I never saw coming. When I opened my front door and stepped outside, the first thing I noticed was silence, too much silence. My driveway, which usually greeted me with the sight of my car ready to roll, felt strangely occupied. I blinked, confused, then looked toward my garage. The door was wide open, which was odd, because I was certain I had closed it the night before. I walked closer, a frown forming across my face, and then I froze. Sitting right there inside my garage was not my car, but a shiny black SUV. It wasn't just any SUV, it was the Karen sisters' prized vehicle, the one they paraded around the neighborhood like it was some luxury trophy. I recognized it immediately. For a moment, I stood there in disbelief, thinking maybe I was imagining it. But no, it was very real. My garage had been invaded. My first reaction was confusion. How did they even get inside? Did I forget to lock the garage door last night, or did they somehow force it open? Either way, the message was clear. They had taken over my private space without permission. The realization stung. My garage wasn't just a place to park, it was my space, my boundary, my home. And now, it had been violated. I felt my pulse quicken. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I walked over to their house next door. The Karen sisters, Rachel and Melissa, were infamous in the neighborhood. Everyone had a story about them. They shouted at delivery drivers, demanded neighbors trim trees that weren't even on their property, and argued with children for riding bikes too close to their driveway. People mostly avoided them, because engaging meant drama. And yet, here I was, forced to confront them. I knocked on their door, firmly but politely. A few seconds later, Rachel opened it. She had that smug look plastered on her face, the one she wore like armor. Before I could even speak, she raised an eyebrow and said, "Oh, you saw the car, didn't you?" "Yes," I replied, keeping my voice calm though irritation was rising in my chest. "Why is your car in my garage?" Rachel smirked, as if I had asked the most ridiculous question in the world. "Well, our driveway is being cleaned, and Melissa's car is already taking up the street spot. So, we thought it would be fine to just use your garage for a little while. You don't mind, do you?" Her words hit me like a slap. The entitlement dripped from every syllable. Before I could respond, Melissa appeared behind her holding a cup of coffee. She added casually, "We'll only be a couple of hours. You'll be fine. It's not like you really use it anyway." I stood there stunned. They had not asked, not apologized, not even acknowledged that it was my property. Instead, they acted as if I should be grateful to host their car. My first instinct was to shout, to demand they move it immediately. But something in their smugness told me they were itching for a fight, that they thrived on chaos and confrontation. So instead, I swallowed my anger. "I do mind," I said finally, keeping my tone steady. "I need you to move it now." Melissa rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, come on, don't be so uptight. We'll be out of there in no time." Rachel leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Honestly, you should relax. It's just a garage. Just a garage." The words echoed in my mind. To them, it was just a garage. To me, it was a matter of respect. It wasn't about the space, it was about the principle. They had crossed a line. I could already feel that they weren't planning to move their car anytime soon. I clenched my jaw and nodded. "Fine," I said simply, turning away before my temper snapped. They smirked as if they had won some invisible game, as if my silence was a sign of surrender. But inside, something else was happening. A plan was already forming in the back of my mind. If they wanted to play games with my space, then I would show them that games can have consequences. That day at work, I couldn't concentrate. I kept replaying the scene in my head, the smug smiles, the dismissive tone, the sheer audacity. Every time I thought about their SUV sitting in my garage, it felt like an invasion, like they had trampled over my boundaries just because they could. I realized then that the Karen sisters operated on one principle: take what you want and never apologize. It wasn't just arrogance, it was entitlement at its purest. By the time I got home, their SUV was still there. My patience was wearing thin, but instead of confronting them again, I chose silence. I went about my evening, cooked dinner, and sat at the table staring at my upcoming travel itinerary. In 2 days I was scheduled to leave for a 10-day trip. At first, I considered postponing it, thinking I needed to resolve this issue before I left. But then, a thought crept into my mind. What if I didn't postpone? What if I used my trip as the perfect opportunity to turn the tables on them? That night, lying in bed, I smiled to myself for the first time all day. The more I thought about it, the clearer my plan became. If the Karen sisters wanted to park in my garage without permission, then so be it. But they wouldn't be getting their car back anytime soon. The next morning I went about my routine as if nothing had happened. I didn't mention the car, didn't look at their house, didn't show even a flicker of annoyance. But inside, my decision was made. In 2 days, I would pack my bags, lock my garage with their car inside, and disappear for 10 days. No confrontation, no shouting match, just a silent lesson in boundaries. And so, Chapter 1 closed not with resolution but with quiet anticipation. The storm was brewing, and the sisters had no idea that their smug little victory had just set the stage for their biggest humiliation yet. The morning of my trip arrived faster than I expected. The past 2 days had been a strange blur of preparation, quiet smirks, and suppressed laughter every time I passed by the garage. Their SUV still sat there like a stubborn intruder, gleaming under the weak morning sunlight, as if mocking me. But instead of feeling anger this time, I felt a calm sense of satisfaction. Today was the day my plan would fall into place. I woke up earlier than usual. The air outside was crisp, carrying with it the faint scent of wet grass. I brewed my coffee, the bitter steam curling into the kitchen air, and sat down at the table with my suitcase already packed beside me. My phone buzzed with notifications, emails, reminders, even a weather alert, but I ignored them all. My focus was fixed on one thing: the garage after breakfast. I went outside to check on the car, though in truth I just wanted to savor the sight one last time before I vanished. The black SUV looked almost arrogant sitting there, like it belonged. But the truth was, it didn't belong. And in just a few hours, its owners would realize just how powerless they truly were. I reached up and gently lowered the garage door, letting it slide down until it clicked shut. Then I secured the lock. That sound, the final clink of metal, felt like the punctuation mark to a sentence I had been writing in silence for 2 days. I couldn't help but imagine the scene that would unfold. The sisters, dressed in their usual flashy outfits, strutting up to my garage with their sunglasses perched arrogantly on their heads. They would press the button on their key fob, expecting their car to magically roll out, but nothing would happen. They would yank the handle, try again, maybe even scream, but no matter what they did, the car would remain locked away inside. The thought made me chuckle under my breath. By mid-morning, my taxi arrived. The driver, a cheerful man with a wide smile, helped me load my bags. He glanced at the garage for a moment, then back at me. "Heading out for a long one?" he asked casually. 10 days, I replied. "A much-needed break." "Good for you," he said. "Everyone needs to get away sometimes." If only he knew the full story. I slid into the back seat, casting one last look at the closed garage door as we pulled away. It was almost poetic there, car trapped inside, my plane ticket in hand, and 10 days of freedom stretched out before me. The flight itself was uneventful, though I found myself replaying the plan in my mind over and over again. I imagined the phone calls they would make, the tantrums they would throw, the panic setting in when they realized I was unreachable. I had already turned off my voicemail and silenced all notifications. There would be no way for them to contact me. For once, the loudest voices in the neighborhood would be met with silence back home. I later learned from a neighbor, chaos erupted almost immediately. The sisters showed up at my door the very first afternoon, pounding their fists against the wood until their voices echoed down the street. When no one answered, they grew louder, shouting insults and demands. Finally, realizing I was gone, they turned their fury to the garage. But the lock held firm. Frustration soon gave way to desperation. They called the police, reporting that their vehicle had been illegally detained. The officer who arrived, however, was less than sympathetic. He calmly explained that it was my property, my garage, and that I had every right to keep it locked. When they argued that they had permission, he asked them for proof. Of course, they had none. Their voices grew shrill, their faces red, but the officer only shrugged and left. The law wasn't on their side this time. The next few days were pure misery for them. I can only imagine their routines collapsing without their beloved SUV. Melissa who was known for her yoga classes and endless shopping trips, suddenly had no way to travel except by begging rides from others. Rachel, who thrived on making dramatic entrances at every neighborhood gathering, was forced to stay home. The humiliation must have burned them inside. Meanwhile, I was thousands of miles away, sipping drinks by the pool, enjoying long walks through unfamiliar streets, and sleeping better than I had in months. The knowledge that their entitlement had finally been checked gave me an indescribable peace. It was like the weight of their arrogance, which had hung over the neighborhood for years, had been lifted even if only temporarily. But the sisters didn't stop at police. Word spread that they began pleading with neighbors, spinning tales of injustice. They claimed I had kidnapped their car, that I was cruel and unreasonable. But the neighbors, who had long suffered from their antics, weren't sympathetic. In fact, most of them secretly delighted in their downfall. Now you know how it feels. One neighbor reportedly told them day after day. They circled like vultures waiting for my return. They watched my house from their porch, glaring at the locked garage as if sheer willpower would break it open. The sight must have eaten away at them, each passing hour another reminder that they weren't in control anymore. As for me, I let go of all worry. The sisters' humiliation was none of my concern. My trip was a time for me, a reward for my patience and restraint. I visited museums, ate at quiet restaurants, and even found myself smiling at strangers, lighter and freer than I had been in years. Their arrogance had given me the gift of peace. On the 9th day, as I sat at a cafe overlooking a busy street, I thought about what would happen when I returned. I knew the sisters would be waiting, their anger boiling over. They would shout, accuse, maybe even threaten. But I also knew something else. They had already lost. No amount of screaming would erase the fact that they had been trapped, powerless, for 10 long days. Their pride had been locked in that garage along with their car. And so, when my plane touched down on the 10th day and I saw the familiar skyline of home, I felt nothing but calm. My plan had worked. The Karen sisters had finally been silenced by shouting, not by arguing, but by the simplest act of all, closing a door and locking it. I collected my luggage, hailed a taxi, and prepared for the final scene of my little play. As we drove toward my house, I could almost see their faces in my mind, red with rage, eyes burning with humiliation. The confrontation was inevitable, and I was ready. Chapter 2 ended with me stepping out of the cab, the cool evening air brushing against my face. My garage stood exactly as I had left it, silent, locked, untouchable. The sisters were nowhere in sight, but I knew it was only a matter of time. Their 10-day nightmare was almost over, and mine was just beginning. The taxi pulled up slowly in front of my house, its headlights sweeping across the quiet street. As I stepped out and grabbed my suitcase, the first thing I noticed was the stillness. My garage door stood exactly as I had left it 10 days earlier, shut, lock intact, silent as a secret. For a fleeting moment, I thought maybe the sisters had finally given up, but I should have known better. From the corner of my eye, I saw a curtain twitch at their window. A shadow moved inside their house, then another. Within seconds, the front door swung open and out marched Rachel, followed closely by Melissa. Their expressions were as fiery as I had imagined during my trip, faces red, brows furrowed, eyes narrowed with outrage. They looked like volcanoes, ready to erupt. Well, Rachel sneered, her voice sharp enough to cut the night air. Look who finally decided to come back. Melissa folded her arms, glaring at me. Do you have any idea what you've put us through? I set my suitcase down calmly, refusing to give them the satisfaction of rattling me. Good evening to you too, I said evenly, unlocking my front door. But they weren't about to let me slip inside. They followed me up the steps like hawks circling prey. Don't you dare walk away from this, Melissa snapped. You trapped our car in your garage for 10 days. 10 days. Do you realize the damage you've caused? I turned to face them, my hand still on the doorknob. Correction, I said, my voice steady. You parked your car in my garage without my permission. I simply went on a trip. What happened after that is your own doing. Rachel's jaw dropped, as though she couldn't believe I dared to stand my ground. That's outrageous. You could have left us a key, or at least a note. We missed appointments. We missed events. We were humiliated. Melissa cut in, her voice cracking with fury. Do you know how embarrassing it was to explain to people why we couldn't drive our own car? Everyone thinks we're idiots now. I raised an eyebrow. I wonder why. That stung. Melissa's face flushed even redder, and for a moment, I thought she might actually lunge at me. Rachel held her back, but her own eyes burned like fire. This is theft, she hissed. You stole our car. That's a crime. I shook my head. Slowly, no, theft is when someone takes something that doesn't belong to them. You, however, trespassed. You used my garage without asking. The law isn't on your side, no matter how loudly you scream. They both sputtered, as if words, who had suddenly failed them. And then, like a final weapon, Melissa tried a different tactic. Her voice dropped into a pitiful whine. You don't understand. We had plans, important plans. We had to beg for rides, borrow favors, cancel meetings. People are talking about us. Our reputation is ruined because of you. I stared at her for a long moment before replying. No, I said. Your reputation is ruined because of you. I didn't make you park in my garage. I didn't make you refuse to move when I asked politely. You chose arrogance, and you paid the price. For a moment, silence fell. The only sound was the faint chirping of crickets and the rustle of leaves in the night air. The sisters stood frozen, their mouths opening and closing, but no words came out. Their pride was battling with reality, and reality was winning. Finally, Rachel broke the silence with a sharp stomp of her foot. Open the garage. Now, I unlocked my door, set my suitcase inside, then turned to them with deliberate calmness. I'll open it in the morning. Right now, I'm tired from my trip. Good night, Melissa shrieked. You can't do this. That's our car. Your car, I agreed. But my garage. Tomorrow. Before they could unleash another tirade, I closed the door gently, letting the lock click into place. Their muffled voices continued outside, shrill and furious, but I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt truly in control of the situation. Their power, their endless noise and entitlement meant nothing now. The next morning, I woke, refreshed and well-rested. When I opened the blinds, there they were, already waiting in the driveway like vultures circling a carcass. Their eyes followed my every move as I sipped my coffee by the window, deliberately slow. I could almost hear their teeth grinding from across the yard. Eventually, I stepped outside, key in hand. All right, I said, walking toward the garage. Let's end this. They crowded around me instantly, hovering like shadows. As I unlocked the door and pulled it open, dust swirled in the sunlight, revealing their precious SUV sitting untouched. Melissa gasped as though she were reuniting with a lost child. Rachel, however, narrowed her eyes at the thin layer of dust on the hood. Look at it, she cried, pointing accusingly. It's filthy. Do you know how much this detailing will cost? I couldn't help but chuckle. Consider it the price of learning respect. Melissa ran her hand along the side of the vehicle, muttering about scratches that didn't exist. Rachel turned on me again, her fingers stabbing the air. This isn't over. You've humiliated us, and we're not going to forget it. I met her glare head-on, unflinching. Good. Maybe then you'll remember not to trespass again. For a long moment, we stood locked in a silent standoff. Then, without another word, they climbed into their SUV and started the engine. The sound roared through the driveway as they reversed out of my garage, tires squealing against the pavement. I watched them speed off down the street, their pride bruised but their arrogance not entirely gone. Still, I knew something had shifted. They had been forced to taste powerlessness, to live for 10 days without control, without convenience, and though they would never admit it, the neighborhood had seen their downfall too. Their invincibility had cracked. As I closed the garage door again, a deep calm settled over me. For the first time since they had moved into the neighborhood, I felt at peace in my own home. The Karen sisters had crossed a line and they had been dragged back, kicking and screaming, into reality. Chapter 3 ended not with an apology from them, but with something even better. Their silence. For the first time, the sisters had nothing left to say. The quiet after their departure didn't last long. For a few days I thought maybe the ordeal was behind me. The Karen sisters had retrieved their car. Their tantrum had run its course. And surely they wouldn't dare try something like that again. But I should have known better. People like them don't accept defeat. They stew in it, letting their humiliation simmer until it boils over into vengeance. It started small. A couple of days after they stormed off in their SUV, I noticed strange things happening around my property. My trash cans, which I had left neatly by the curb, were tipped over and scattered across the street. At first I thought maybe an animal had done it, but then it happened again the next morning, and again the morning after that. Each time it was only my cans, never the neighbors. Soon after, I found footprints in the flower bed by my porch, fresh and unmistakably human. My rosebush, which had taken months to nurture, had been snapped at the stem. And one afternoon when I came home from work, I discovered someone had scrawled the word thief in chalk across my driveway. It didn't take a detective to figure out who was behind it. I didn't confront them, not yet. I knew that engaging would only fuel their fire, and besides, I was curious to see just how far they would take it. People like Rachel and Melissa thrived on attention. Denying them that was its own punishment. But their behavior escalated. One Saturday morning, as I was mowing the lawn, Rachel strutted over with Melissa trailing behind her. Their faces carried that same smugness I'd seen on the day they first parked in my garage. It was almost as if they thought the last 10 days had been erased, as though none of it had happened. You owe us compensation, Rachel announced loudly, loud enough for nearby neighbors to hear. Your actions cost us time, money, and reputation. We're demanding that you pay for the damages. I turned off the mower and wiped the sweat from my forehead. Damages? I asked, feigning confusion. Melissa crossed her arms. Our car was trapped in your dirty garage for 10 whole days. Dust got all over it. Do you know how expensive it was to clean? And not to mention the rides we had to arrange. We want you to pay us back. I stared at them, struggling not to laugh. You parked in my garage without permission. That makes you the trespassers. If anything, I should be billing you. Rachel's mouth twisted into a sneer. You're making a huge mistake. We have rights. Yes, I said evenly, and so do I. And one of those rights is to enjoy my property without interference. The sisters huffed and stormed off, muttering threats under their breath. But this time, they weren't just grumbling to themselves. They started knocking on doors, talking to neighbors, spinning their version of events. From my porch I could hear fragments of their performance words like unfair, abusive, criminal. But the reaction wasn't what they hoped for. The neighborhood, long tired of their antics, didn't rally behind them. Instead, people began sharing their own grievances. Mr. Thompson from across the street recalled how Rachel once yelled at him for trimming his hedge too loudly. The Johnson kids laughed as they reminded everyone how Melissa had once demanded they stop riding scooters because the clicking of the wheels gave her headaches. Stories spilled out like water from a dam, and for once, the sisters weren't the ones controlling the narrative. I watched the shift with quiet satisfaction. Their attempts to smear me had only highlighted their own reputation. The more they shouted, the more ridiculous they looked, and the neighborhood, instead of siding with them, began pulling away. But still, they didn't give up. A week later, I received a letter in my mailbox poorly typed, full of misspellings and signed dramatically with Rachel and Melissa. It was a formal demand that I pay them $500 for emotional distress and vehicular endangerment. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the paper. They might have thought they were lawyers, but it was nothing more than a tantrum dressed up in official language. Rather than respond, I kept the letter tucked away in a drawer. I figured it might come in handy if things escalated. I had a feeling they would. Sure enough, a few days later, they tried one last desperate move. I came home from work to find a police car parked in front of their house. The sisters were on their porch gesturing wildly at my property, their voices carrying across the street. The officer, looking weary, walked over to me. Evening, he said with a sigh. Your neighbors are claiming you unlawfully detained their vehicle. I raised an eyebrow. That again, we've already been through this. The officer nodded. I know. I explained to them that no laws were broken, but they insisted I come out anyway. He lowered his voice, almost conspiratorial. Between you and me, half the precinct knows about these two. You're not the first person they've tried to drag into drama. I chuckled softly. I can imagine. The officer gave me a sympathetic look, then turned back to the sisters. Ma'am, unless you have actual evidence of wrongdoing, there's nothing more I can do. Rachel's face contorted with rage. So you're just going to let him get away with this? Melissa shrieked. We're victims here, victims. The officer pinched the bridge of his nose. Ma'am, the only victims I see are your neighbors who have to listen to this nonsense. That was the final blow. The sisters were left sputtering, their cries falling on deaf ears. As the patrol car pulled away, I could feel the weight of the neighborhood's eyes watching. The sisters had tried to turn the community against me, but instead, they had isolated themselves even further. That evening, I sat on my porch, sipping a glass of iced tea. The air was warm, the street quiet. For once, the sisters' house was silent. No shouting, no stomping, no demands, just silence. And that silence felt like victory. Chapter 4 closed with a sense of shifting tides. The sisters' revenge had backfired spectacularly, their reputation crumbling not because of anything I had done, but because of who they were. Their arrogance had finally caught up to them. And though I knew they weren't finished, people like them never truly give up, I also knew they were weaker than before. For the first time, they weren't the ones in control of the story. The weeks following the failed police stunt were eerily calm. For the first time since the Karen sisters had moved into the neighborhood, their house was quiet. No shrill voices carrying across the street, no confrontations on the sidewalk, no dramatic scenes designed to draw attention. It was almost unsettling, like the eye of a storm. I knew them well enough by then to realize this silence wasn't surrender, it was regrouping. They were plotting something, biding their time. But while they schemed, life moved on. The neighborhood felt lighter. Neighbors who used to keep to themselves began stopping by for small conversations. Mr. Thompson would wave from his yard. The Johnson kids laughed more freely while playing outside, and even the mailman commented on how peaceful the street felt without the constant disruptions. It was proof that the sisters' hold on everyone's nerves had been broken. One Friday evening, that peace was tested again. I was coming home from work when I noticed a small group gathered near my driveway. Rachel and Melissa stood at the center, waving papers in the air, their faces twisted with righteous fury. As I approached, I realized what they were holding: flyers. Beware of the neighbor. The headline read in bold, messy letters. Beneath it, they had written a rambling story about how I had imprisoned their vehicle and emotionally tortured them. They had even added crude drawings, complete with arrows pointing toward my house. I took one of the flyers from a neighbor's hand and scanned it, then looked back at the sisters. Creative, I said flatly. Did you use crayons or just a broken printer? Melissa's face turned crimson. This is serious. Everyone deserves to know what kind of person you are. But this time, the neighbors didn't nod along or avoid eye contact. Instead, they rolled their eyes. One woman actually tore the flyer in half right in front of them. We all know who the problem is here, she said. And it isn't him. The sisters' mouths opened, ready to unleash their usual tirade, but no one was listening. One by one, the neighbors walked away, leaving Rachel and Melissa standing, alone, clutching their flyers like weapons that had suddenly turned to dust. For the first time, I saw something new flicker across their faces in certainty that night. As I sat on my porch watching the sunset, I realized the battle was over, not because I had outsmarted them or shouted louder, but because the neighborhood itself had spoken. Their voices, once so powerful, had been drowned out by collective exhaustion. Their reputation, once untouchable in their own minds, was shattered beyond repair. Over the following days, their presence dwindled. The flyers disappeared, the chalk messages stopped, even the petty vandalism ceased. It was as if they had finally realized they were fighting a war they couldn't win. Their arrogance had isolated them, and their downfall wasn't my doing alone, it was the weight of their own choices crashing down. One afternoon, I saw the for sale sign go up in their yard, stood there like a white flag of surrender, swaying gently in the breeze. I watched from my porch as prospective buyers came and went, some leaving quickly, others staying longer. The sisters, once so loud and domineering, now hovered quietly, their energy drained. When the moving truck finally arrived a few weeks later, I stood outside, arms folded, watching them pack their belongings. Rachel avoided my eyes, her face hard and cold. Melissa shot me one last glare, but it lacked the fire it once had. It was a glare of defeat, of resentment that couldn't find an outlet. As the truck pulled away, carrying their SUV and all their arrogance with it, the neighborhood seemed to exhale in relief. The street was quiet again, not the uneasy silence of tension, but the peaceful quiet of freedom. For the first time in years, I felt truly at home standing in front of my garage. I thought back to the moment this had all begun, the shock of finding their car parked inside without permission, the anger I had swallowed, the plan I had quietly put into motion. I remembered the click of the lock as I closed the garage door before my trip, and I realized just how much that single moment had changed everything. The Karen sisters had come into my life like a storm, full of noise and destruction, but in the end, it was their own storm that drowned them. They had underestimated me, underestimated the neighborhood, and most of all, underestimated the consequences of their entitlement. I opened my garage door, looking at the empty space where their SUV had once sat. It was just a garage against simple, quiet mine, and that was enough. The story ended not with shouting, not with revenge, but with silence. A silence that belonged to me, to the neighbors, to the street we all shared. A silence that the Karen sisters could never disturb again. They had parked in my garage without permission. I had locked it and gone on a trip. And in doing so, I had unlocked something much bigger: the power of patience, the strength of boundaries, and the truth that entitlement always carries its own downfall.